Okay, people, I thought I'd uploaded a video about this before, but it turns out I hadn't, so this is a subject I have quite strong views on, and it's once again related to human rights in China, but something quite specific and deeply controversial, which is Falun Gong. Um, now, before I start talking about my views on this, I just want to read you the introduction from its Wikipedia article. Falun Gong or Falun Dafa, literally meaning Dharma wheel practice or law wheel practice, is a spiritual discipline first introduced to China in 1992 through public lectures by its founder Li Hongji. It combines the practice of meditation and slow-moving Qigong exercises with a moral philosophy. Falun Gong emphasizes morality and the cultivation of virtue in its central tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, and identifies as a Qigong practice of the Buddhist school through its teachings, though its teachings also incorporate elements drawn from Taoist traditions. Through moral rectitude and the practices of meditation, practitioners of Falun Gong aspire to better health and ultimately spiritual enlightenment. Okay, that's the introduction from the Wikipedia page. I've also looked across a lot of the websites and articles and so on. From the outset of this video, I want to make it very clear, I am not a Falun Gong practitioner. Okay? I repeat, I am not a Falun Gong practitioner. So, if you get that impression, that's not the case. I'm not a member of Falun Gong, I don't practice Falun Gong, and I've no affiliation with Falun Gong. However, I still believe that the persecution against them is unjustified, brutal, and reprehensible. You know, I've, including quite recently, been in rather heated debates, even with Chinese friends of mine, about this group, and both the official Communist Party line on Falun Gong and widespread public perception in China is very negative. The Communist Party portrays them as a dangerous cult. Much of the Chinese public seem to believe that. Now, I don't want to say that the Chinese public are lying or they're wrong about what they perceive from Falun Gong. A close friend of mine recently, a friend of mine, she had pretty strong views on it, and she's not a party member. She's a very nice girl. She's not the sort of person who takes delight in casual cruelty or anything like that. But she had strong views on them, and she said that they're liars, they're a dangerous cult, and so on. And I disputed this because I've seen no evidence whatsoever that they are. However, I didn't dispute her experience. I simply disputed her claims about them, but not what she said she saw. What she said she saw was a Falun Gong mother forcing her child to set themselves on fire. Of course, there is dangers from any cult and any sort of religion that indoctrinates its followers, but I think this is quite ironic in a country like China, which, when you consider the biggest cult in China, which is the worship that still exists around Mao Zedong. I made another video about Mao, and I just think it's rather ironic that Falun Gong gets vilified as a cult when there is still this cult of personality around a man that murdered 70 million people. Now, whether you like or dislike Falun Gong, there is no way in hell they have murdered 70 million people. Not a chance. The general idea is that in 1999, Falun Gong had so many members that it outweighed membership of the Communist Party, so Jiang Zemin at that time saw them as a threat to the power of the Communist Party, and that's when the persecutions began. And this is some truly sickening stuff. I'm talking about extreme torture. Elderly people, women are not spared. Of course, that's as barbaric whoever the victims are, but I've seen plenty of documentation describing the sort of torture that is being used against Falun Gong members. And there's several points I would like to make about this. Let's say, for the sake of argument, the Communist Party is right, and Chinese public perception is right, and Falun Gong really is a dangerous cult that brainwashes its followers and so on. If that really is the case, and I don't see any evidence for it, if it is the case, does that still justify torture? We have an expression in English, 2 wrongs don't make a right. So let's say they really are a dangerous cult. Does that justify the sort of repression that the Communist Party has used to put them down? I think not. And people say, oh, well, look, they do all their activities outside China. But they don't take into consideration they have no choice. I saw a video a while back of Falun Gong practitioners having a demonstration in San Francisco about human rights in China, and they were harassed by plainclothes Chinese people. This was in Chinatown. A lot of Falun Gong people widely suspect they were paid by the Communist Party to do that. I.e. the Chinese consulate or embassy in San Francisco actually gets thugs to go out there and intimidate these people. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that is the case. And then there was an old man who pretended that one of the Falun Gong people had assaulted him. Now, the video evidence quite clearly contradicts that. He'd put it on by the time the police arrived to try and... luckily the police weren't buying into this. But this is the sort of hassle Falun Gong practitioners have to face. Now, like I said, I'm not a Falun Gong member. I'm not an expert on their practices. But I have not seen any evidence whatsoever that would sort of give credence to the sort of claims that were weighed out against them. I've heard people claim they're murderers. I've seen zero evidence for that. However, I have seen evidence for the persecution against them. I mean, if the Communist Party is so innocent in terms of how they deal with Falun Gong, why is it they cannot produce hard evidence about the claims that they make, i.e. that Falun Gong is a cult? And why is it they cannot refute the claims that Falun Gong make, that their practitioners are routinely harassed, interrogated, intimidated and tortured? And the torture is the worst element of all. Torture is a barbaric thing in any context, but especially when it is against people whose only crime seems to be practicing something that the Communist Party doesn't like. Now, I've looked at their websites, I've looked at their videos. I see no evidence whatsoever that there's anything dangerous about this organisation. And it isn't just restricted to Chinese people. There's many foreign practitioners who haven't escaped the persecution either. They've been roughed up when they've been in China. What I'm trying to get at is, if you're Chinese and you do hate Falun Gong, that's your right. But whatever way you gloss it over, that doesn't justify torturing these people. There's people I don't like in Britain, in my country, but I would never advocate torturing them. I would never justify torturing them. I hate tabloid editors in this country. I believe they're destructive. I think they're bad for society. But I wouldn't advocate that they get tortured. So you don't have to like Falun Gong. You can disagree with their methods or whatever. But to condone what happens to them is just despicable, because there's absolutely no moral argument whatsoever for what the Chinese government does to Falun Gong practitioners. Some sources suggest as many as 3,500 have been tortured to death. And even now, as I'm speaking, this persecution continues. Now, Xi Jinping hasn't mentioned anything about reforming this. He's made a lot of progressive statements about reforms in China. That's good, it's to be welcomed. But he hasn't said anything about ending the persecution of Falun Gong. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, they really are a cult. The Chinese government isn't giving itself any moral high ground in what they're doing. If Falun Gong really is a cult, then why not just let them be exposed to the rest of the world? Show the rest of the world why they're a cult. I believe the responsibility is on them to prove it, and so far they haven't. Now, I've made this point before. China's a one-party state, which has very powerful propaganda, which excuses everything the party does. Now, luckily, the public doesn't believe everything the party says. That's a good thing. But when it comes to vilifying people who are critical of the Communist Party, then unfortunately, still a very wide segment of the Chinese population just believe it. Not necessarily because they're slavish to the CCP, but because that propaganda is so powerful that they cannot see. I mean, with the greatest of respect to my friend, I tried to show her the sources. And I'm not naming her because I'm not like that. But all you need to know is she's a Chinese friend of mine. I tried to show her the sources that detailed the persecution, and she just didn't want to know. And that to me demonstrates that she's been, I don't want to say brainwashed, but she's been subjected to communist propaganda about them. And she said, oh, wherever repression exists, I don't support it. But nevertheless, she isn't prepared to really look in detail at what the CCP does to these people. Now, I know you can doctor photos, but again, it's up to the Communist Party to prove that the photos detailing this torture is doctored. There's some truly sickening examples online. One that really always shocks me is a young woman called, I'll just get it up on Google now. This for me is one of the most glaring examples of all. Was a young woman called, just bear with me a second, I'm getting it up. Gao Rong, who was tortured with electric batons by guards for 7 hours in Longshan labour camp, Shenyang. In 2011, Amnesty International report states that authorities renewed a campaign to transform Falun Gong practitioners, which required prison and detention centres to force Falun Gong inmates to renounce their beliefs. Those considered stubborn, that is, those who refuse to sign a statement to this effect, are typically tortured until they cooperate. Many die in detention or shortly after release. Now, Amnesty International would not endorse an organisation that itself was guilty of human rights abuses. If Falun Gong is guilty of brainwashing its members and committing the sort of things that many people think they do, I mean that is many people in China, Amnesty International would also condemn them. Amnesty does have a long-standing record of independence. It has criticised Western governments, including the US, for human rights violations. So it's wrong to say that they're somehow in the pocket of this agenda against China. They often criticise China because China continues to have brutal human rights practices. That's simply a fact. It's not some sort of conspiracy against China. China is entirely responsible for its own bad image. If China didn't torture Falun Gong practitioners, then it wouldn't have this image. So in my opinion, it's up to the Communist Party to prove that they don't torture Falun Gong practitioners. It's not up to Falun Gong victims of the persecution to prove that they're making this up, that they're not making this up. Because independent reports have detailed this. This isn't just Falun Gong sources, this is independent reports like Amnesty International. So that to me, and frankly it's very hard to believe anything that comes from Communist Party material because it is propaganda. In a one-party state, how can they cry bias when it's so difficult to get any independent source in China? That's one thing that annoys me most about when Chinese people say that, oh, this is biased Western media, or so and so, this is biased, this is Falun Gong working for the CIA, and other unfounded claims, things like that. But how can you get a fair picture in China when the media is absolutely dominated by the Communist Party? So it's unfair to say there's biased Western media or these human rights groups have an agenda against China when the Chinese government makes it so damn hard to freely assess the situation. You know, we have a saying in English, if you have nothing to hide, then you wouldn't censor this information. You wouldn't hide this stuff. That proves their guilt, as far as I'm concerned. So, in conclusion, the persecution of Falun Gong is barbaric. It has to end. There's no justification. And if Falun Gong is a cult, as the Communist Party claims, it's up to them to prove it. And even if they are, it still wouldn't justify the torture. Two wrongs do not make a right.